A very good morning to all my dear students. In my previous class, I had spoken about the introduction of the subject titled as Banking Law and Practices. And I had also mentioned the reasons behind introducing this subject by the university. In today's class, we are going to look forward to the syllabus of the subject for the current academic semester. This subject consists of 5 units, wherein 10 classes are being allotted for each unit. So totally we have 50 classes for this particular subject. In today's class, we are going to see the different concepts to be covered in each unit in a chronological way. So let's start with the first unit. The title of the unit is Bank and Banking, wherein we are going to understand what is the meaning of a bank, the origin of the bank, how was the development of banking system in India, which can also be called as the growth of banking system in our country. All the banks in our country are regulated, controlled by a specific act which is called as Banking Regulations Act, which was framed and introduced in the year 1949. So, the entire working of the different banks in our country are controlled and governed by a specific act which is called as Banking Regulations Act 1949. This act has several provisions contained under it, and hence this act controls the overall working of the different types of banks in our country. In the first part of this unit, we are going to understand what is the meaning of the term bank and who is called as a banker. We are going to have a glimpse of the different features of banking system in our country. According to the provisions of the Banking Regulations Act 1949, this act has made a clear classification of banks. So different banks in our country comes under the sphere of this act, and according to this act, the banks are classified into 8 different categories, such as commercial banks, industrial banks, central banks, agricultural banks, exchange banks, cooperative banks, indigenous banks, and regional rural banks. So we are going to study each bank in detail. How is the working of each bank? What are the different features and functions of all these 8 banks? And what are the objectives behind starting these banks? After understanding the classification of banks, we are going to study the different types of banks. That is, specifically, we are going to focus on different types of commercial banks in our country. The commercial banks are subdivided into two categories, that is scheduled banks and the non-scheduled banks. So we are going to mainly focus on the functions, objectives and types of commercial banks. When I speak about types of commercial banks, I already told you that we are going to understand the difference between scheduled banks and non-scheduled banks. Then we are going to take up a topic called as functions of commercial banks, wherein there are two different functions. The first function is the traditional function and the other function is the secondary or the subsidiary function. The traditional function is further subdivided into two categories, that is primary function and the secondary function. We are going to see each function in a detail. Then we are going to take into consideration the different modern services which are provided by the banking system, such as apart from the traditional functions of bank, there are new services which are being undertaken, such as maybe execution of standing orders, collection of dividends, interests. There is something called as mobile banking, internet banking, to resolve the queries and to take care of the customers. There are different extension counters which are designed and developed. There are different types of services, especially insurance services, which are now controlled by the banking system in our country. So in this unit, totally we are going to take into consideration the traditional functions of the bank and also the modern or the new services which we are going to understand in a detail. So here we are going to understand what is the meaning of bank, who is a banker, what is the different provision which are governed according to this act called as the Banking Regulations Act, what are the functions of different banks, which are the different banks, and what are the services provided by the different banks. In the second unit, the title of the unit is Banker and Customer Relationship. Here we are going to understand what is the concept or the meaning of the word customer. According to the Act, how is the word customer being derived? Then we are going to take into consideration the relationship of a customer and a banker. We are going to understand the meaning of the word banker also. So when we understand the meaning of the word banker as well as customer, we are going to look forward to understand what is the special relationship between a banker and a customer. Then there are case studies on debtor, creditor, special features of debtors and creditors, who is a bailer, who is a bailee, who is a trustee, agent, etc. Hence, we are going to understand what is the obligation of the bank and how does the bank honors the check, how does the bank maintain the secrecy of accounts. Under that, we are going to study the right of general lien and right of set-off. We are going to study the different garnishee orders, right of appropriation, and the last concept called as law of limitation. It is a simple concept based on the Limitation Act which was introduced in the year 1963. Here we are going to understand the Act in short and some provisions relating to the Act. In the third unit, which is titled as checks and is a very interesting topic, we are going to understand what is the meaning of check, what is the definition of a check, who are the parties to the check, such as there are three parties called as a drawer, drawee and payee. So understanding each definition of a drawer, drawee and payee in detail, we are going to understand what are the features of a check, which are the different types of check. Then we are taking into considerations the essentials of a check. Then implication of crossing and opening, that is general crossing and special crossing. Then we are going to take into consideration what is the meaning of marking of a check, what is material alteration, which are the instances of material alteration of a check, what is the meaning of endorsement, what is the definition of endorsement, what are the types of endorsements, what is the meaning of IFSC code, what does IFSC code stands for, what is the meaning of loss of check, and lastly, how do you stop the payment of check? In the fourth unit, which is a very simple unit, we are going to first understand what is the opening and how does the customers operate their own accounts. Here we are going to understand the introduction of the unit. Later we are going to understand the different types of accounts, such as basically you must be knowing or you already have a savings account. Then we are going to study the different types of accounts, such as savings account, current account, then fixed deposits, what is passbook, why it is required, what is a dormant account, etc. We are also going to study the termination of bank account, that is closure of bank account in this unit. The next part, the other half of the unit speaks about types of special customers to a bank. There are n number of special customers called as minors, people having joint account, partnership account, companies account, trust account, executives account, administrators account or administrators account, and how do you close an account. So here we are going to study what are the precautions to be taken by a bank while opening and closing such types of accounts. Lastly, the fifth unit, which is a very, very interesting unit, which speaks about e-banking or internet banking. This concept is an emerging concept which is introduced in this particular decade. In this electronic banking, we are going to understand all the basic functions of a bank and also internet banking. Here we are going to understand what is internet banking, the history of internet banking, the development of internet banking, then what is electronic information transfer system, what are the services provided under e-banking, and then we are also understanding what are the advantages and the disadvantages of e-banking. Here we are going to study a topic wherein we are going to understand what are the securital issues, what are the differences between e-payment services, all about ATMs and forms of electronic banking. There are n number of forms of electronic banking such as ATM, online banking, electronic fund transfer, internet banking, smart cards, electronic clearing services, telephone banking, personal computer banking, electronic data interchange, cash management services. Here we are going to study all these forms of electronic banking in detail, and while studying so we are also going to understand each advantage, each type of advantages and disadvantage of each type of electronic form. Hence, this unit is a very interesting unit and will take into consideration the different forms of e-banking and internet banking also. Hence, totally you have 5 units to be covered, and in the next class I would be starting with first unit, which is titled as Bank and Banking in India. I hope you have clearly understood the concepts to be covered in the syllabus. Without wasting much time, in my next class, I would resume with the first unit. With this, I conclude. Have a good day.